This is a case file. This one is not about the person who left. It is about the system inside you that has never, not once, stopped reaching for them. Every forensic examination begins with a body and a question. This one begins with a question you have probably asked at 3 a.m, phone in hand, rereading a conversation for the 4th time. Why can't I just stop wanting someone who has already shown me they won't choose me back? You have called it love. You have called it chemistry. You have called it just really, really liking this particular person against your own better judgment. None of those words are wrong exactly. They are just the explanation available to someone who has never been shown the actual machinery underneath. 6 findings, 1 final report. And a man who spent his career studying something he insisted was not a feeling at all, but a biological system, as old and as non-negotiable as hunger. John Bowlby was a British psychiatrist who broke with almost everyone in his field by arguing that a child's bond to its caregiver was not learned dependency, not a habit picked up through feeding and comfort. It was a hardwired survival system built by evolution with one job: keep you near the person who keeps you alive. He called it the attachment behavioral system. And what he discovered about how that system gets built in childhood explains, with uncomfortable precision, why you are still chasing certain people through your phone at midnight as an adult. Begin. Before we examine what this system did to you, we have to establish what it actually is, because almost everyone gets this wrong from the very first assumption. Most people think of attachment as an emotional preference, a nice-to-have, something that makes life warmer when it's present and sadder when it's absent, but fundamentally optional. Bowlby's first finding dismantles that completely. Attachment is not a preference. It is a regulatory system in the same category as hunger and thirst. A system whose entire function is to monitor one variable and respond the instant that variable moves. The variable is proximity, distance from the attachment figure. When proximity is high, the system stays quiet. When proximity drops, physically or emotionally, the system activates, and it does not ask your permission first. Here is the detail that explains almost everything that comes later in this file. The attachment system does not evaluate whether the caregiver is good at the job. It does not run a quality check.
It bonds to whoever is consistently present, regardless of how well or badly that person performs the role. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes brutal sense. A present caregiver who is inconsistent, distracted, or unpredictable is still, statistically, a better bet for survival than no caregiver at all. The system was built to attach first and assess quality a distant second, if ever. This is the first finding. The system that lives in you right now was never designed to bond only with people who treat you well. It was designed to bond with whoever is there, and to do so with a strength that has nothing to do with how that person actually behaves. One of Bowlby's students, a researcher named Mary Ainsworth, eventually built an experiment to measure this directly. It was called the strange situation. A mother and infant are brought into an unfamiliar room. A stranger enters. The mother leaves. The mother returns.
Researchers watch one moment more closely than any other. Not how the infant reacts to the separation, but how the infant reacts to the reunion. Most infants, about 7 in 10, were distressed when the mother left and quickly soothed when she returned. Ainsworth called this secure attachment. But a meaningful minority did something else entirely at the reunion. Some could not be soothed at all, arching away from comfort even while reaching for it, distressed and resistant at the same time. Ainsworth called this anxious-resistant attachment. Others showed almost no visible reaction to the mother leaving or returning, a calm that looked on the surface like independence. It was not independence. Later studies measuring heart rate during the same kind of separation found it spiking in these infants even while their faces stayed perfectly flat. The distress had not disappeared. It had been rerouted underground, out of sight, because showing it had stopped being useful. If you recognized yourself in the second group just now, distressed and resistant, unable to accept the very comfort you are demanding, keep that recognition close. It explains more of this file than any other single detail. Bowlby's second concept is the one every attachment researcher since has built on: the secure base. A reliably available caregiver functions as a base camp. The child ventures out, explores, takes risks, and returns periodically to refuel, knowing the base will still be there. This is what allows a nervous system to relax enough to actually look outward at the world instead of inward at the question of whether support still exists. When the base is unreliable, present some days, withdrawn or distracted on others with no way to predict which, the child cannot fully make that switch.
Exploration becomes secondary to monitoring. A part of the system stays permanently assigned to one task: watching the caregiver for signs of departure. That monitoring does not turn off when the child grows up and the caregiver is replaced by a partner, a friend, a parent who is still alive but still inconsistent. The system kept the job. It just changed who it was watching. This is the second finding. If some part of you is always quietly scanning a relationship for signs it might end, checking tone, checking response time, checking what a delay might mean, that is not insecurity in the casual sense. That is a base camp system that was never given a base reliable enough to stop checking. People with a working secure base report something specific when asked to describe it. They say they rarely think about the relationship at all when things are calm. Not because they don't care, but because the system has nothing left to verify.
The attention that would otherwise be spent monitoring is simply free to go somewhere else, toward work, toward friends, toward their own unrelated life. That freed attention is the actual prize a secure base provides, and it is precisely what an unreliable base never lets you keep. If you have ever envied someone's ability to just not think about a relationship for an entire day, you were not envying indifference. You were envying a monitoring system that had finally been allowed to stand down. Bowlby and his colleague James Robertson documented something specific about what happens when an attachment figure becomes unavailable. It happens in a sequence, and the sequence has 3 stages: protest, despair, detachment. Protest comes first. Active, energized attempts to restore proximity, calling out, reaching, In a child's case, literally crying and searching the room. The system is not giving up.
It is escalating, because escalation is what used to work. You know this stage. The second and third text when the first goes unanswered. The phone picked up and put down 4 times in 10 minutes. The urge to say one more thing, clarify one more misunderstanding, fix whatever you've decided must be fixable before the silence is allowed to mean what it appears to mean. If protest does not restore proximity, despair follows. The energy collapses. Searching turns into withdrawal, hopelessness, a kind of low-grade grief that doesn't announce itself as grief because nothing has officially ended yet. And if the separation continues long enough, detachment follows despair. A defensive shutdown that can look from the outside exactly like healing. Sometimes it is. Often, in Bowlby's original observations of children, it was something else. The system protecting itself by disconnecting from a need it could not get met, not the need disappearing. This is the third finding. The cycle you have lived through more than once, the frantic reaching, the crash, the cold, sudden numbness that follows, is not a character flaw playing out. It is a documented 3-stage response observed in children separated from caregivers, replaying itself in you on a much smaller, much more private scale. Here is where the file gets personal in a way numbers alone cannot capture. Bowlby proposed that every child builds out of their early relationships something he called an internal working model, a set of largely unconscious assumptions about 2 questions. Can other people be relied on? And am I, in particular, the kind of person who is worth being reliably loved? A child whose caregiver was inconsistent does not usually conclude, "My caregiver was unreliable." A child concludes something closer to, "Love is something I have to work for. Attention is something I have to earn through enough effort or enough alarm. And if I am not currently being chosen, the correct response is to try harder, not to leave." That model does not get filed away as a childhood memory. It gets installed as the default lens for reading every close relationship that follows, including, decades later, the one you are in right now, or the one you cannot stop checking your phone about. This is the 4th finding. You are not imagining a pattern that isn't there when you notice you keep ending up in the same dynamic with different faces attached to it. The internal working model is doing exactly what it was built to do, predicting from a sample size of one very early relationship how this new person will probably behave. This finding explains the part of the file that confuses people the most. Why the calm, consistent, reliably available person can feel oddly unconvincing, and why the unpredictable one can feel, against every stated preference, like the real thing. An internal working model built on inconsistency does not recognize stability as safety. It recognizes it as unfamiliar, occasionally even as suspicious, because nothing in its training data looks like that. What it does recognize, instantly in the body, often before a single word is exchanged, is the specific shape of someone whose attention is not guaranteed. That shape matches the original template closely enough that the nervous system reads it not as a warning, but as something closer to home.
There is a second mechanism layered on top of this, one Bowlby's framework predicts directly. The attachment system does not calm down when a bond becomes uncertain. It does the opposite. Distance and unpredictability are read by the system as exactly the conditions it evolved to respond to with more urgency, not less. An available, securely attached partner gives the system nothing to do. A partner who is warm one week and distant the next keeps the system permanently activated, scanning, protesting, working. Because as far as the system is concerned, an unconfirmed bond is the single most dangerous condition there is. This is the fifth finding. The intensity you have mistaken for chemistry, more than once, in more than one relationship, may simply be your attachment system running at full activation in response to uncertainty, mistaking the alarm for the feeling, because the alarm is louder. Exhibit 1. The person who replies in 4 hours, not 4 minutes, and how much louder that silence is than any compliment the same person has ever paid you. The system is not measuring affection.
It is measuring proximity, and 4 hours reads as a 4-hour absence, regardless of what was actually true on the other end of it. Exhibit 2. The specific, almost suspicious boredom that can creep in with someone who is simply consistently kind. No spike, no chase, no sudden silence to interpret. And so, for a system trained to associate love with vigilance, nothing for it to actually do. Calm gets misread as absence of feeling, when it is only an absence of alarm. Exhibit 3. The wave of relief that arrives when an unavailable partner finally responds warmly, followed within hours by a fresh wave of anxiety about when the warmth will be withdrawn again. That is not a healthy cycle completing itself. That is the protest phase being rewarded just often enough to guarantee it never stops being useful. None of this means you are choosing badly on purpose, or that some part of you enjoys the chaos.
It means the alarm and the attachment have become wired to the same switch, and right now, only one of them can be heard at a time. This is the final finding. It would be satisfying to end this case file by declaring the system broken. Something to override, suppress, or argue yourself out of through sheer willpower. Bowlby's own position, stated across decades of clinical work, was almost the opposite. The attachment system is not malfunctioning when it does this. It is functioning exactly as designed in an environment it was never built to evaluate correctly, mistaking an adult relationship for the original life or death bond of infancy because that is the only template it was ever given.
Bowlby wrote, in Attachment and Loss, a line that belongs above the entry of every relationship you have ever found yourself unable to leave. Intimate attachments to other human beings are the hub around which a person's life revolves. Not only when he is an infant or a toddler or a school child, but throughout his adolescence and his years of maturity as well, and on into old age. He was not describing a weakness to be cured. He was describing the central organizing need of being human, present in everyone, distorted in some by an early template that taught the system to associate love with uncertainty, effort, and the threat of withdrawal. Here is what the file changes once you have read it. Not the early relationship, not the years already spent reaching for people who were never going to reliably reach back. What it removes is the verdict that you are simply built wrong. Too needy, too intense, too unable to let go.
You are running an old, accurate prediction model on new, sometimes entirely different data, because no one ever told you the model could be retrained. The internal working model was assembled in childhood by a child with no other data and no say in the matter. It was never delivered to you as a permanent sentence. Bowlby spent his later career insisting exactly that point. The model can be updated by new, sufficiently consistent relationships, including, eventually, the relationship you build with your own awareness of how the system works. Researchers who followed Bowlby's work have a name for what happens when that update actually takes hold: earned secure attachment. Adults who did not start with a secure base, who nonetheless arrive later at the same steady internal model as someone who had one from the beginning, not because the early file gets erased, but because enough new evidence eventually outweighs it.
The file does not need to be erased to stop running the room. It only needs enough new evidence on top of it that the old prediction stops being the most likely one. Understanding the system does not switch it off the next time a phone stays silent for 3 hours, but it replaces one question that has no useful answer, "What is wrong with me?" with one that does. What is this alarm responding to? And is it responding to the actual present or to a room you left a long time ago? That is the autopsy report. Case closed.